do anything to save themselves.
These are the worst attacks on the U.S. mainland in modern history.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy.
A day of terror strikes the United States. Welcome to a special edition of 9 Eyewitness News at 5. I'm Gravir Dinza.
I'm Gordon Peterson. September 11th will forever be remembered as the date of the worst terrorist attack on American soil in American history. It's going to take days to know just how many have been killed, but already the estimates are in the thousands. The attack came in 3 waves, beginning just before 9 this morning. 2 hijacked aircraft slammed into the World Trade Center, followed by a crash into the Pentagon here in Washington, and then not long after that, word came of a plane crash outside Pittsburgh. The first images that came just before 9 this morning, one of the jets crashed into the World Trade Center. Minutes later, this is unbelievable, happened again. Another passenger jet slammed into a New York City landmark. And then after 10 this morning, with fires burning out of control and people jumping out of windows, the Twin Towers actually collapsed. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the death toll will be more than any of us can bear. Then the Pentagon in Arlington takes a direct hit. The nerve center of the nation's military bursts into flames after it, too, was struck by a hijacked plane. Fire burned out of control. Injured workers rushed to area hospitals, great billows of smoke drifting skywards toward the Potomac and beyond. We're being hijacked. We're being hijacked. Those were the frantic words of a passenger in an emergency cell phone call from yet another hijacked plane. That plane, a Boeing 757, would crash moments later in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The frantic caller, who said he was locked in the plane's bathroom, repeatedly told the dispatcher, "This call is not a hoax." The whole building shook. Those were the words of a Pentagon worker talking about today's terrorist attack.
An incredible fire broke out and one entire side of the 5-sided structure collapsed. Dave Statter has the very latest in this live report. Dave, they're still battling that fire, which began at 9:38.
I'd like to tell you that the smoke has not stopped coming out of this building. It's lighter smoke, which is always good news, but still here there's smoke coming out of the Pentagon. Let's take a close-up look of what happened here today. The gaping hole that's on the west side of the Pentagon. This is in front of the Pentagon helipad. That's where the plane hit. It was 9:38 this morning, and let's go to some videotape shot at 9:38 this morning. This is what it looked like as the fuel from that jet burned on the outside of the building and spread that fire into the building and making it so difficult. There were many people injured then. Many people probably lost their lives immediately besides those on the plane. We just don't have an accurate account. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was among those, we are told, outside helping those who were injured. Admiral Craig Quigley, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, says this was a full assault on the United States of America. There's no way to prepare for this. But Tori Clark, the spokesperson for the Pentagon, tells us that Pentagon personnel went to work right away helping the injured. Let's look at what happened about 30 to 35 minutes later, our next tape. This is when this whole area collapsed. It did not collapse immediately. It took about 30, 35 minutes. That hole then formed in the Pentagon. Firefighters went to work right away, putting out the fire, but of course looking for those who may have survived this. A couple people were immediately rescued from the scene with serious burns. They were medevac out of here by medevac helicopters. More ambulances arrived, some 30 people taken to Arlington Hospital from here, still fighting this fire, which has basically gotten into the very center courtyard of this building, under the roof line here. It certainly looks better than it did earlier as far as firefighting operations. Now let's hear from some eyewitnesses who were here when this all happened.
There was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards.
This is a travesty beyond belief.
We heard it happen and everything shook and the ceiling started to fall. And, I thought it was because there's generators and things. We just thought something, there was a malfunction, something exploded.
All right, we're here live now with Harold Schaetberger, who is the General President of the International Association of Firefighters, a man I've known for quite a few years. Basically, he's going to give an update on New York. What do you know about injured firefighters and dead firefighters in New York?
Dave, I've been in touch with both of my locals. Obviously, the results are going to be devastating. I don't want to make a prediction yet. I know there were literally scores of firefighters in both of those buildings doing search and rescue, doing fire attack when the buildings collapsed. It is so horrific it may reach a couple of hundred or more.
That's just firefighters, not
just firefighters. I'm sure we're looking at thousands, certainly maybe in excess of 10,000 civilians. The devastation up there is beyond belief.
And you're getting this information based on people you've been talking to in New York?
I've been in touch with my 2 affiliates and the leadership on the ground there. Our firefighters who are actually at the scene.
Your thoughts today?
Our nation's at war. It'll be something we will remember as my father remembered Pearl Harbor. My members are right now doing the work on the ground. They are America's domestic soldiers who have been fighting this battle since 8:45 this morning.
And they continue here at the Pentagon?
And they're in there fighting right now, and they'll continue to do so until this is under control.
That's the first numbers we've heard from New York, Gordon and Gavir.
Yeah.
Estimated deaths of firefighters in the hundreds. That's just firefighters alone who were there for the rescue operations. And we heard one senior official, possibly very high up in the New York City Fire Department.
Right. All right, Dave Statter, thanks. A lot of those people injured at the Pentagon were taken to Virginia Hospital Center. And there's a news conference underway. Let's go there.
EMS personnel that were injured on the scene.
How many EMS personnel that are injured are here now?
I think there's been a total of 5 EMS personnel that have been treated here thus far, and none of them have been admitted to my knowledge. There are currently 3 being treated now with relatively minor injuries.
Are you expecting more coming in? You said you have 36 now. That's a new number.
Right. At this point, we expect some additional persons, and we're certainly staffing ourselves to handle a large influx if necessary. But the word we have from the scene is that there are no large numbers of patients that they expect to transport in the near future.
Are they confirming any fatalities that may have occurred yet?
We have no registered fatalities that have come to our hospital, but I cannot speak to what's been seen on the scene.
Are they still in surgery, some patients?
There are 2 patients still in surgery.
Is that the femur and the hand?
That's correct.
All right, so the nature of the injuries, broken bones, burns?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, the injuries that we have been seeing are not unexpected in a blast-type injury or a blast-type event. There's smoke inhalation problems. There's some trauma-related problems to the actual blast itself, as well as injury due to falling debris and so forth, and a fair number of actual burns, 1st through 3rd degree burns.
Anything else new to report at this hour?
That's about it. I just wanted to give you the updated numbers, and we are currently on disaster mode here at the hospital, although we're going to evaluate that in a meeting shortly.
Okay, you've been listening to Dr. Sverha. He is with the emergency services here at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington. Again, the number has now risen. It's 36 people who have been admitted, who have come to the hospital, and they had 13 admitted before. I think that number has gone up to 16. Of that number, of those people who have been admitted, they do have 8 people in intensive care, and at last count there were 4 people on ventilators. The most severe injuries, of course, they're talking about broken bones and somebody in surgery. We're not sure specifically what that was for, but also smoke inhalation and that sort of thing. We also want to let you know that it's really slowed to a trickle at this point. They don't expect any more people, but the last time I told you that, you saw 2 ambulances pull in behind me. The last person was a firefighter who came from the Pentagon. We did confirm that both of those ambulances were carrying people from the Pentagon. One of them was a firefighter. Also, all day today, we've been telling you about donating blood, and I just got off the telephone. I'm flipping my pad here to let you know what I found out. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers have called up the Inova Health Services blood bank, and they now have a 4 to 5 hour wait. There are so many people that want to give blood right now. They say they're open for 24 hours. That is indefinitely. If you would like to donate blood, and again, there's a shortage of many supplies, including blood, specifically type O, the universal donor, they're asking you to come 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, midnight, sometime overnight, and they will accommodate you because they are staying open indefinitely. 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. That will allow you to go down to Gallows and Woodburn Road in Fairfax County. It's in Annandale, just outside the Beltway at 3289 Woodburn Road if you would like to donate blood. They're also taking plasma and platelets. Regular blood donations take about an hour, a little bit longer for plasma and platelets. They are delivering to 11 hospitals throughout the D.C. area, but they say if New York needs it, New York will also get it. So there is a tremendous need, of course. We don't have any any fatalities here at this hospital, but we do know where Dave Statter is tonight, there are definitely fatalities, and so many scores more in New York. So the blood is something that will be needed for those casualties. That's the very latest here from Arlington Hospital. Back to you guys at Broadcast House.
Jennifer Ryan reporting 36 people treated. That's a relatively small number, and it's, in a sense, a discouraging number, because when you look at the damage to the E ring on the west side of the Pentagon there, it reminds you of Oklahoma City and the way the floors collapsed.
In other words,
they went this way.
In other words, those people inside, we don't know. We don't know. We've been talking a lot about security, Gordon, and word just coming now on the Associated Press that Crawford, Texas, which is where the President and Mrs. Bush have their 1,600-acre ranch, security has been tightened around Crawford, Texas. The Secret Service isn't saying a whole lot, but apparently state troopers have been posted there, and they're checking vehicles coming in and around that area.
Yeah, the President's on his way back to Washington, we understand. We understand they're flying the flag at half-staff at the White House right now, as you can see. You can also see, if you look closely, in the center there, the snipers up on the roof, the manpower. There are always people on the roof of the White House, but we understand the manpower has been increased since this disaster. And look at this scene. I mean, it's very serene. If you just tuned in, you had no idea what has occurred in New York and here in Washington, D.C.
But we do know that states of emergency have been declared in Virginia and Maryland and in Washington, D.C. as well. Mayor Tony Williams has, as I said, declared a state of emergency in the district.
City officials have been working with the FBI and the Secret Service since right after the first plane crash at the World Trade Center. Mayor Williams spoke to the press this afternoon.
The state of emergency has been declared to ensure that in the event we have an incident, in the event the worst were to happen, we are completely prepared and ready to act. Right now, I would characterize our actions, and certainly this press conference is part of that, is simply putting all of our citizens in our city on the highest state of alert.
Well, that's Mayor Williams in D.C., and also there are states of emergency in Virginia and in Maryland.
Well, the famous Twin Towers of the World Trade Center used to be one of the first things you saw as you approached New York City from Washington.
Not anymore. Today's terrorist attacks have altered New York City's famous skyline. Mayor Rudy Giuliani says the exact numbers of dead and injured probably will not be known until sometime tomorrow or even the next day. Gretchen Carlson has more now from New York City.
It's being called another Pearl Harbor. Two hijacked commercial airliners deliberately flown into New York's World Trade Center towers.
I basically got on all fours and I just crawled to the door, hoping that I was crawling the right way.
The well-coordinated terrorist attack left gaping holes in the skyscrapers and both towers in flames. Thousands are injured and a still untold number of people are dead. Just a short while after the planes hit, both towers crumbled.
We're watching people fall from the building, and then you just saw the whole side of the World Trade Center just fall right off, and it caught a couple of us, and we just made a mad dash all the way down here.
Hundreds of bystanders on the streets of Lower Manhattan were covered in soot, many in a state of panic, as they unexpectedly witnessed the worst terrorist attack in the history of this country.
It's war. It's declared war, and we need to now pull together as a nation.
The people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us.
FBI officials confirm 4 commercial flights were hijacked this morning, with 2 of the planes being flown directly into the World Trade Center target.
50,000 people work in the World Trade Center buildings, but it's impossible to know how many of those people may have been inside when the attack happened, or how many total people are dead. Gretchen Carlson, CBS News, New York.
Joining us now from our newsroom is Mr. Hussein Ibish, who is the Director of Communications for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Mr. Ibish's committee is in the business of keeping us in the media honest in terms of scapegoating and things of that nature after a tragedy of this sort. Mr. Ibish, what are your concerns after this?
Well, I think the Arab American community shares exactly the same emotions that the rest of this country does. We are shocked, we are very, very angry, we're bewildered. We're appalled, and I think we regard it universally as an attack on all Americans, without exception. And so we share every single emotion that our fellow Americans do. But we also have some anxiety about blame being attached to Arabs in general, Muslims in general, or something like that, even though there's no indication whatever of who's responsible, and even though collective blaming and collective responsibility is obviously wrong. Already we've had reports from Detroit and some serious incidents in Philadelphia that are of great concern. And
what kind of incidents in Philadelphia?
There have been a couple of attacks on stores, and Arab American-owned businesses have been attacked and ransacked. And you know, the reports are still coming in, but I know it was serious enough for the Arab American community in Philadelphia to have already had a press conference appealing for calm, to ask for police protection for mosques and prominent Arab businesses. And it's really terribly sad because you know, our community feels exactly the same pain as every other American. Plus, we experience this immediate blaming from a small group of people, but still, you know, when there's no knowledge whatever of who did this or why.
Well, the two top government officials, U.S. government officials, have already used the name Osama bin Laden.
They're speculated, and it's normal to speculate, it's human to speculate, as long as we all remember that speculation is just that, and that the facts will be known. This is obviously a massive conspiracy of the most dastardly and evil variety, but it must have been on a huge scale. And so I'm sure that police work and law enforcement work will shortly uncover a trail, and we'll know sooner rather than later who it is who did this. And I think it's very important for all of us to come together to bring the criminals to justice. However, you know, to assume necessarily that this is people from one group or another, or even one ethnic group or religion or another, is a mistake. We should remember that when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred, people were quick to assume that it was done by groups based outside the United States, possibly in the Middle East or in Afghanistan, and it turned out to be, unfortunately, homegrown terrorists. So we really don't know at this point, and I think we all need to allow law enforcement to do its job and just support our government in bringing these heinous murderers to justice as soon as possible.
Mr. Ibish, I assume you've seen the videotape of Palestinians rejoicing about these events?
I saw that. I've also seen the statements by every single Palestinian political leader condemning this attack. And I know that the overwhelming number of people in the Middle East, Arab Americans and Palestinians, are absolutely appalled by this. There may be a small minority of people in one neighborhood of one Palestinian town who reacted in a truly despicable way, you know, because of their own pain and suffering over the last 11 months with 600 dead unarmed civilians and what have you. It's indefensible, but it's no reflection on the 250 million Arabs or the 1 billion Muslims or the 4 million Arab Americans in this country. So none at all.
So, Mr. Ibish, what do you tell those folks?
Which folks?
The Arab Americans who live in this country.
Yeah.
What do you say to them about what they can expect in the next few days?
Well, obviously, we urge caution. We urge everyone to be cautious. We urge people to exercise common sense, and we urge them to report any suspicious incidents to the police and let us know as a civil rights organization. And I think we need to, you know, come forward, as we all have done, and join hands with our fellow Americans in this day of national calamity and work together, all Americans of whatever ethnicity and whatever religion, to make sure that our country is safe from this kind of horrible attack, and to make sure the criminals are brought to justice.
Why do you suppose the United States is such a big target these days?
Well, I mean, it's a target from inside and from outside. So, I mean, I think it's a little hard to know exactly before you know who's done it. It's hard to know what motivated them. I do think the United States, as the great power in the world, does attract attention, and certainly we've seen that there are dissident groups within the country, including people on the right like Mr. McVeigh and others. So, you know, obviously there are jealous people around the world, resentful people around the world, people who don't like our policies, and Americans who object to the federal government and who are simply alienated, like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
All right.
So there are all kinds of motivations, and we need to find out who did it and then bring them to justice as soon as possible.
Mr. Ibish, we thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
I wish it would have been under more pleasant circumstances.
All right, Mr. Ibish, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this afternoon. One of the planes, the one that crashed into the Pentagon, originated at Dulles International. It was headed from there to Los Angeles. It was an American Airlines plane, and our Peggy Fox is at Dulles. Peggy?
Well, Gravir, the fact that one of those hijacked planes originated from Dulles makes a lot of workers here very nervous. Almost all of the workers have gone home. The only people left really are security people. All the non-essential workers were told to leave immediately after the airport was closed. But I'll tell you, security is as tight as it's ever been. Fighter jets crisscrossed directly above Dulles Airport this afternoon. At 10 a.m., all flights were canceled, but the screens were never updated. Everything stopped in its tracks. Planes were left right at the gates as airline crews scurried home or to hotels. Hundreds of travelers, some of whom were just transferring through Dulles, were stranded.
My company has an office in Richmond, Virginia. That's where I was headed, and left this morning 6 o'clock from Omaha. And in flight, maybe 10 minutes out of D.C., we were scheduled to get in about 10 o'clock. They said they were diverting to Dulles, and we landed here, and it's been pretty much a nightmare since then. I mean, just trying to get out of here. But apparently, from what you've just said, I'm lucky to be here.
This young couple had just come from visiting New York City with their 15-month-old twins. They're thankful not to be in New York now, but they just want to get home to Seattle.
We were on the plane getting ready to leave, and that's when they told us what happened, and then they brought us back.
Off.
So now we're waiting to go back to the hotel.
A little nervous about being near the nation's capital?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where everything's happening, yeah, I don't want to be here, that's for sure.
I was lucky to get a hotel room in the area. I did run into people inside the airport who had great difficulty getting a hotel room. They said all the hotels in the area are filled. Take a look at this Jersey barrier, as it's called, concrete barriers. They've been putting up several of these rows right here in the departure ramp, and there's one below as well, and I see them putting one down the way right as we speak right now. So security looks like it's even increasing here at Dulles Airport, and we're told that this airport's going to be closed at least until noon tomorrow, and we're kind of in a wait-and-see mode right now. I do have a couple of phone numbers for you in case you think you might have a loved one on one of the hijacked planes. American Airlines number is 703-661-5211. 703-661-5211, and United Airlines 1-800-932-8555. 1-800-932-8555. For now, I'm Peggy Fox reporting live at Dulles Airport. Gravir and Gordon, back to you.
All right, Peggy, thank you. You can only imagine what the scene is at Charles de Gaulle and Leonardo da Vinci in France and Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome and elsewhere, where Americans are trying to get back. Some of the flights are being rerouted to Canada and so forth, but they're going to have trouble getting out of there.
All of this started about 8:45 this morning Eastern Standard Time, and right now we want to go to a comment from a gentleman who was actually videotaping outside the World Trade Center when the first plane crashed into the building. The second plane, rather, crashed into the building.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind the car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Yeah. Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. That's good.
Let me correct myself quickly. That obviously was video being taken when that second tower came crumbling down to the ground. That was shortly after the second plane crashed into it.
Man shooting amateur video, and obviously he was having trouble breathing and asked a firefighter for a couple of quick hits off his respirator.
And speaking of those firefighters, there were about 200 of them that we're being told, it's on the wires, and also Dave Statter spoke with someone a short while ago, that are still trapped inside the building. They were inside the building trying to rescue people when the building collapsed.
Now we understand that yet another building has collapsed in New York. Do we know what building this is? Well, it's got to be in proximity to one of the two towers, and as
the two towers are gone,
so it's got
Is this a third building now in New York?
This is the third building. We don't know. This is some of the problems of technology, and that is that the pictures advance the facts. It's Building 7 of the World Trade Center, we understand, has collapsed in New York, and there you saw a video of it. And in addition to firefighters, Gravir was referring to firefighters. There were police officers in there, too, involved in the rescue effort when those two twin towers collapsed. Now we understand Building 7 has gone down in Lower Manhattan. There you can see the dust and debris and smoke as a consequence of that in Lower Manhattan.
Blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of that area have been cordoned off as a result of what happened earlier this morning. And I guess for good reason, because this third building collapsed just moments ago.
And, you know, in terms of the fatalities, you know, Rudy Giuliani said this is Building 7 again. We're going to just replay what you've just seen. This is Building 7 in the World Trade Center area is collapsing. Now, whether we don't even know whether this was something that was engineered for safety reasons or it just happened as a consequence of the two collisions this morning, where the two airliners hit the two towers.
Mm. We actually are going to go to USA Today Live now. Lauren Ashburn is with Jack Kelly, who is an expert on Osama bin Laden. And Lauren,
well, Jack Kelly was also in Israel, in Jerusalem, when the
suicide bomber.
The suicide bomber went to the pizza parlor, right?
Yes, that's right, Gordon and Gavir. We're on the 22nd floor of 1000 Wilson Boulevard in Arlington, Virginia, and we have watched as the jet crashed into the Pentagon. We were here. Jack Kelly, of course, came into work. He's our foreign correspondent for USA Today, and you're right, was there in Israel. Jack, what can you tell us? What are intelligence sources saying? Is this Osama bin Laden?
At this point, all fingers appear to be pointing towards him. He is the only person with the sophistication and the wealth to carry out something like this.
Is anyone going on the record saying this?
No, nobody at this point will go on the record, but every single law enforcement official is saying it's either state-sponsored or it's Osama bin Laden, and appears to be Osama bin Laden.
What is the FBI doing about this?
They have just launched their largest criminal investigation ever in U.S. history. They have dispatched teams to Washington, to Pennsylvania, and to New York. At the same time, the CIA is going through all of its intelligence over the last couple weeks. The National Security Agency, the same thing. And
it seems, based on military intelligence, that someone could have dropped the ball. Is that what you're hearing?
At this point, they haven't pointed any fingers at each other, but we're quietly beginning to hear was that, look, we blew it, our intelligence stunk this time. Put it this way, it was so bad that the FBI's anti-terrorist task force, responsible for investigating situations like this, was on a training exercise in Monterey, California at the time of the bombing, and still can't get back to investigate it.
Jack Kelly, Ford correspondent, USA Today. Gordon and Gavir, before we leave you, I just wanted to show you the international edition front page. Here it is, U.S. under attack. Hundreds feared dead as passenger jets destroy New York's World Trade Towers. Hijackers likely piloted planes themselves. Here, the terrorism coverage blanketing TV. And as you mentioned, Gavir, earlier, Major League Baseball canceled, stocks down. And for the first time ever, Tom Curley, the publisher of USA Today, said, we will not have stocks in our newspaper tomorrow.
Lauren, quickly, if Jack is still standing there.
Is Jack still there?
Yes, go right ahead.
Why now? Why now? If in fact, this is Osama bin Laden, why now?
Good question. We don't exactly know why. We are poring over every possible bit of information to find out what is significant about this day. Nobody seems to know why. The only thing we can gather at this point was that all of their plans came together on this point, where they could hijack the certain planes, they could plant car bombs, but nobody seems to know. That is the $64,000 question.
Jack,
we don't know the answer.
Jack, the Mullah Omar, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, was quick to say that this was much too complex an operation for Osama bin Laden.
With all due respect to Sheikh Omar, I disagree. Having met Osama bin Laden's people and having known some of them very, very well, this is the type of activity that they would have planned for and prepared for years, and this has many of the hallmarks of an Osama bin Laden attack.
What is it about these attacks that have his fingerprints on them?
They are so sophisticated, they're so well planned, and he never actually comes out and takes credit for something afterwards. There is nobody out there who could pull off something like this other than Osama.
And apparently this would have had to include somebody who knew how to fly an airplane.
At this point, what they are investigating are looking at 4 separate pilots, or at least 4 separate pilots, who may have been associated with Osama bin Laden and who may have flown for other airlines, who possibly walked into the cockpit, shot the pilots, and then took over the planes.
And how do they get through security at this point?
Good question. At this point, the FBI has seized all the security camera tapes, and they're looking at the tapes as we speak. There are so many questions unanswered in this one. There's only one thing that holds true. Whoever did this really knew what he was doing.
Jack, President Bush earlier said that we are going to hunt down the person responsible for this, and they will have to suffer the consequences. We've talked in the past about how Osama bin Laden is a pretty sneaky devil and is pretty tough to catch.
There are contingency plans set to go, and the plans have been set to go for several weeks now on what to do if Osama bin Laden were to plan a very large attack. And they've selected targets within Afghanistan, and you can be assured that if it is Osama bin Laden, that the U.S. will probably retaliate, and retaliate massively.
Jack Kelly, USA Today, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And joining us now is Neil Livingstone with American University. Mr. Livingstone is a terrorism expert. Thanks for being with us. Does this have Osama bin Laden's fingerprints?
I'm Gerald Post, George Washington
University.
Right,
yeah, Tim. I was going
sorry
to say.
about that, sir.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. The producer tells me in my ear we're going to Livingstone. Sorry about that.
Sorry,
my
Dr.
apologies.
That's fine.
What's your response? What's your reaction
well,
to this?
I did have the opportunity of testifying as an expert witness in the recent federal trial in New York of the presumed Osama bin Laden terrorist twin bombings of our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. And I very much agree with Mr. Kelly. This has all the hallmarks, including the issue of simultaneous, well-coordinated attacks in two cities at nearly the same time, and multiple attacks in the same city with both the Pentagon and the state here. I'd also like to emphasize the issue that one-time clue, going back to that trial, if I'm not mistaken, the sentencing for that trial is to occur at a courtroom very near the World Trade Center tomorrow.
That's
right.
Correct. That's correct. That
so that may be one of the timing why now questions that is being raised.
But you have to, I mean, this is a very complex operation. And all kinds of security, all kinds of security problems exist in carrying something like this out, and they managed to breach all of them.
Well, it's remarkably sophisticated, and despite speaking of proportionate response and getting whoever does this, it really makes it clear how against this low-intensity conflict with small groups of people not associated with a state, able to plan in secret in groups that are really relatively impenetrable by our intelligence agencies, how difficult an opponent this is.
Well, it certainly makes a lot of us think how vulnerable we are. Gordon and I were just talking about how these folks breached security at 4 airports.
Yes, I am very struck by that. I chaired for Vice President Bush's Commission on Aviation Safety and Security in the 21st Century, a joint conference several years ago. And one of the themes was aviation terrorism, and the issue of the relative security and the downgrading of this as a target on the one hand, but the impossibility of countering the determined, especially religious belligerent terrorists. I think it's worth emphasizing that religious terrorism in particular, I guess I'm off now.
No, you're on. Dr. Post.
I'm sorry. I think it's worth emphasizing that religious terrorism in particular has no constraint on mass casualties. This is quite strikingly different. Moreover, some 40% of the terrorist acts in recent years have had no responsibility claims. We believe that's because of the increasing frequency of religious extremist terrorism, killing in the name of God. One doesn't need to have a headline in the New York Times or a television story on Channel 9. God knows, after all.
Would you pinpoint? I mean, would you say that there's been a massive breakdown in American intelligence, or is this just something we're going to have to expect for the next few years, or the next several years, for that matter?
I wouldn't say it's a massive breakdown in American intelligence, as incredible as that may sound. This is such a difficult target. Having said that, I am struck. Hearings were starting today on defending and protecting America against weapons of mass destruction terrorism, referring to chemical, biological, nuclear terrorism. The major terrorist acts that have been so devastating, the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, the earlier attack on the Trade Center buildings, these attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center were all conventional terrorism.
Right.
And we need to really pour significant more resources into our intelligence services and be protecting against conventional terrorism. Thus by, for example, hardening our embassies overseas.
I'm not making an argument for or against a missile defense shield, but it wouldn't have had any impact on this.
That's absolutely correct.
Although, but they're talking about billions and billions going into that.
And money is fungible, after all, and yet there are cries unheeded for improving our security at embassies abroad.
All right, Dr. Gerald Post, we thank you very much.
And we're sorry we misidentified you at the top.
Well, I should hope so.
Okay, sorry about that. He is indeed. He's been with us. He was with us earlier today. Dave Statter's been at the Pentagon all day today since the Pentagon was hit, and he has new information for us. Dave?
We're looking at the Pentagon, still burning, still fire under the roof there. Fire at either end, basically. We saw erupt just a short time ago. The firefighting operations continue. One of the largest firefighting operations in Washington, D.C. history, with fire companies joining Arlington from the military, from surrounding counties as far away as Loudoun and Montgomery County. Montgomery County Search and Rescue on the team, their urban search and rescue. Fairfax County here still don't have a counting for you of how many people may have perished in this building and on the airplane. As we talk about this here, with me is Harold Schaitberger again. He's the general president of the International Association of Firefighters. You have a story to tell us about the first firefighters who were here with Fort Myer Fire Department, who are stationed right there.
That's right. We have a station right at the Pentagon for the heliport. The two firefighters right after the towers were hit, I'm sure were put on a high level of alert. They were outside and actually reported to their dispatch on an open mic that they saw the commercial airliner coming toward the Pentagon and witnessed with an open mic the airliner hit the Pentagon.
Right next to them?
Right next to them, probably 40 yards to the right. They are in the hospital now with injuries and burns, but again, a horrific incident.
Now, we talked to you at the top of the hour, and you gave us some information, some concrete information from talking to your chapter in New York. You've been talking to the sources there, and there's now some confirmation on the wire of 200 trapped firefighters in the World Trade Center rubble in New York. You presume that many of them are dead.
Well, those that are in the rubble, it will be an absolute miracle for anybody to survive. I was in Oklahoma City and watched the devastation of that. We are talking about 2 mountains of concrete that have literally come down in the street. We know we have just scores and scores of firefighters that, very tragically, that we're going to lose, and we will not going to know that number till tomorrow morning sometime.
But also the number of people in those buildings, your information that we're talking about a death toll, well, nobody will give us a concrete figure. What are you hearing?
Well, and I don't want to be the one to try to do a concrete figure, but I am hearing that we may reach or exceed 10,000 victims.
You're hearing that from the general president of the International Association of Firefighters. Basically, the rescuers show up there. They're going into mode to rescue people, and all of a sudden it comes down on top of them.
They're inside that building. They're doing their job. They're working the stairways. They're working to evacuate the citizens. They're working to advance, to put themselves in a position to attack the fire. They're doing search and rescue. They're doing their job like they're trained to do, and that building comes down.
So maybe 200 firefighters lost, and his best information from talking to firefighters in New York that the death toll there could be 10,000 or more. Again, that is not confirmed at this point, but it's the only person right now who's ready to put an approximate number of what's going on in New York. And it seems to jive the figure with the number that the wires are reporting that are trapped in the rubble of firefighters alone in New York. And again, here at the Pentagon, we don't have any good information for you about number of dead here.
Dave, thanks a lot.
Now, we also know that a 47-story adjacent office building, that is adjacent to the Twin Towers in New York, has also collapsed. But it's our understanding that that building had been evacuated when the collapse occurred.
This was known as Building 7 of the World Trade Center, and that is fresh video you're looking at of that coming down.
Now, again, they were able to get everybody out of that building before it collapsed. So I don't know whether it was accomplished by demolition experts or whether it just happened as a consequence of what occurred earlier today.
Gordon, Dr. Post just was talking about security at the U.S. embassies, and now the wires are reporting that the U.S. State Department is urging embassies to, in fact, shut down. And let me just tell you that several U.S. embassies in the Middle East have decided to close indefinitely. The American embassy in Japan has opted not to open tomorrow. The U.S. Embassy in Venezuela has shut down at least through Wednesday, and in Italy, the U.S. Embassy there has warned American tourists to be vigilant and also take appropriate action to increase their security and reduce their vulnerability.
Now, downtown at this hour, 5:39, 5:40 on a Tuesday, would be gridlocked. People trying to get out of there. Let's see what it looks like right now. Here's Bruce Johnson.
Gordon, there's no gridlock here. The confidence, the strut of the nation's capital is long gone. As a matter of fact, the people who live and work here know that while the terrorists struck the World Trade Center, they struck the Pentagon, they probably could have hit any building in this town. Let's take a look at what we found today.
Group three. Everybody here? Dalton, you gonna work with me?
Yeah, I don't know. Where you want me at?
Put your shirt on, have your stuff ready to go.
A state of emergency in the nation's capital. An E-alert for the fire and ambulance department.
All the units and stuff are ready to go.
Elsewhere, downtown Washington was being evacuated. With all airports closed, rental car companies could not keep up with the demand.
We're from Oklahoma City, the two of us, and we had friends in the Oklahoma City bombing that were killed. And so to hear that today,
everywhere, people felt stunned and violated by today's terrorist attacks. You feel less safe right now?
Definitely, yes.
I didn't think this thing would really happen, but I'm just shocked. I'm in a state of shock.
All federal employees were sent home. At Union Station, all of the activity was on the outside as all the trains had stopped running.
They didn't tell us nothing. They wouldn't let us even near the doors. They said, just get away from the building, come over here and sit down.
By midday, much of downtown had been turned into a ghost town. All federal buildings had been closed off to the public. The president had been kept out of the White House and out of Washington.
Actually kind of glad he's not here, amongst all this. I think communication is going to be fine.
Your thoughts?
It's a little surprising, but, this is just such a crisis that we've never experienced before. They don't know what to do, so...
Of course, the latest up-to-date word is that the president is now en route back to Washington. Over my shoulder back here, don't know if you can see it, but for the first time, we see some presence of the National Guard on the streets of the nation's capital. Normally, when this happens, if it isn't for a parade, it's something serious. Also want to point out, a lot of people are asking right now what happens tomorrow. Some people want to get back to work as soon as possible. They're waiting to hear from OMB, from the D.C. government, on whether or not these public buildings and public workers will be allowed back on the job. Just want to point out also, and this had to have come from a firefighter, D.C. firefighter approached me a little while ago, and he says, the terrorists picked September 11th, 9/11, to strike in New York and Washington. Javier, Gordon, back to you.
Bruce, Mayor Williams says all bridges into and out of D.C. are open, as are all streets except some right near the White House.
Okay, Gordon, and all of these roads, for the most part, downtown are open. You can get around, but for some reason, it's probably voluntary, people are staying away from this area, and probably with good reason.
Thank you, Bruce Johnson. We told you earlier that the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson was aboard the jetliner that crashed into the Pentagon. What did you say?
Barbara Olson.
Barbara Olson, yes, I was going to mention her name. We are now getting word from the Associated Press that she apparently called her husband from the plane as the plane was being hijacked. She twice called her husband, according to the Associated Press, and described to him details of the hijacking, including that the attackers were using knife-like instruments. This is according to law enforcement officials. They wouldn't say very much more about the conversations. The Associated Press talked to Ted Olson, who told them she was on the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She called from the plane while it was being hijacked. I wish it wasn't so, but it is.
Ted Olson was, of course, who argued the case for the Bush campaign before the Supreme Court, over the Florida election controversy. And Barbara Olson, who is a Washington personality and attorney in her own right and is often seen on Larry King Live and other broadcasts.
She was on American Airlines Flight 77, which was leaving Dulles and headed to Los Angeles.
And that's the one that went into the Pentagon.
Yes.
Area hospitals are busy tonight handling volunteers who have come to donate blood. Frank Herzog visited the facility at Inova Alexandria Hospital.
Milan Yeager.
Within a half hour of the Pentagon attack, a large lobby area in this hospital filled with volunteers and potential blood donors.
We are overwhelmed with donors. It's just a wonderful response. People are concerned and are looking to help in any way that they can.
The line of donors stretched down a long hallway. One couple had waited for more than 3 hours.
Actually, I tried to get involved with setting up of an aid station with a friend of mine who's a paramedic, but they had too many people to handle. So trying to find something else that I can do, just some other way to contribute.
The faces we saw reflected two emotions: stunned disbelief and steely resolve.
Because I have B negative blood. It's the most rare blood, and I like to donate whenever I can.
Unbelievable. Coordinated attack. Unbelievable.
It's staggering. We were watching some footage in there, and it's unbelievable.
We will be open until midnight here at Alexandria Hospital. We'll be open here at Alexandria from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be open at the Mount Vernon Center from 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be open at Mount Vernon at least until 10 o'clock tonight.
If you've never given blood before, it's really a piece of cake. The hardest part is the paperwork. If you'd like to find a blood bank in your area and don't know of one, you can call this number, 1-866-BLOOD-SAVES. They need your help. From Inova Hospital in Alexandria, I'm Frank Herzog for 9 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much.
There were two planes that hit the World Trade Center today, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175.
And we have exclusive videotape from CBS News of that second plane crash. Oh, there it is. Oh, my God.
Oh, my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
It's unreal.
It's just...
oh, my God!
A ball of flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center. Untold death and destruction.
As you can imagine, a chaotic scene there this morning. We had a tough time today in our area as people tried to leave downtown Washington, D.C.
This is the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. People leaving New York City after that by foot.
Many people walking, yes.
One of the most, Brooklyn Bridge, of course, one of the most famous bridges in the world. And these folks are in a hurry, and as you say, with good reason. A Navy official in Norfolk, Virginia, says the country hasn't seen an attack like today's, of course, since Pearl Harbor, and the Navy has sent the Kennedy and other aircraft carriers and carrier destroyers and into the Washington and New York areas.
President George Bush is vowing revenge and promising to, what he says, hunt down and punish those responsible for the terrorist strikes. Greg Stoddard has more on that now from our newsroom. Greg?
Well, the president says the full resources of the federal government will be used to protect the American people. And tonight, he's on his way back to Washington. Mr. Bush was in Florida when the first attack occurred, and later, after landing in Louisiana, he had tough words for those responsible.
Make no mistake. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The president with strong words tonight for those responsible for the Trade Center and Pentagon attacks. Mr. Bush telling the world the United States has taken every security precaution.
Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status.
Mr. Bush in constant contact with the vice president and the rest of his cabinet, and the administration making it clear the U.S. will not be intimidated.
Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively.
And Karen Hughes says the vice president is in a secure place inside the White House. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. The entire cabinet in communication with the president. Gavir, Gordon?
Greg Stoddard in our newsroom. Thank you. Our Verge Jock is at Connecticut and K. All right, we're not going to him just yet.
The city's getting help tonight from the D.C. National Guard. Shortly after the attacks this morning, the call went out for members to report to the Armory, and we'll have more on that later.
Now let's go to Verge, who is ready for us at Connecticut and K. Verge?
Here at just about 5:30, we saw a parade of military armored personnel vehicles going down K Street westward direction. We're not sure exactly where they're headed to, but a couple of dozen of them. Streets were blocked off. Earlier today, some other strange, unusual sights on the streets of Washington. The closing of federal buildings and a mass exodus from downtown Washington turned the streets into a big parking lot. Concerned pedestrians stopped to learn the latest about the terrorist attacks.
Kind of scary, actually. It's really scary. The morning started very well, but it's like I'm not looking forward to go back.
Catherine Axelson is talking about going back home to New York City. She visited the U.S. Capitol before it was evacuated.
I'm still in shock. I'm not quite can imagine what happened. So it's like I'm still in shock because I can't see it from my eyes now. I saw something on the screen over there, and it's just like, wow, is that really happening?
Unfortunately, it was happening. Washington was under siege.
I know. As many other Americans, are just in a state of shock right now. And as we begin to think, to deal with all the grief and the loss here is just terrible for our nation. And how
Of course, government workers in federal buildings were evacuated a long time ago. If you take a look over my shoulder, you can see not too much of a rush hour in downtown Washington tonight. Gervier and Gordon, back to you.
Bird shock, thanks a lot. Now to the story about the D.C. National Guard. The city is getting help from them. Our Stacey Cohan is covering that angle for us, and she's in our newsroom now. Stacey?
Well, Gavir, you know the National Guard's history is based on the Minutemen of the Revolutionary War. It's their job to serve at a moment's notice. And across our area, men and women dropped everything today to come to the aid of a city under attack. The D.C. Air National Guard F-16s fly over Washington with orders to turn away aircraft from the city, and if that doesn't work, to shoot them down. Across the city, hundreds of National Guard members report for duty at the D.C. Armory.
I was in class, so I didn't know what was going on. I got a call on my cell phone later on that break, and they told me that I need to get in.
So far, the D.C. National Guard is calling in the 372nd Military Police Battalion and all subordinate units, but more could follow.
The interesting thing is we've had many people just show up before the call went out. It's unbelievable. A lot of people just have been calling or just showing up.
The D.C. National Guard stands ready to back up any and all police departments in the district as the state of emergency here continues.
Well, we're used to it. He used to be active duty, so he was deployed all the time. We're used to it. But, of course, I don't want to see him go, but duty calls.
Now, there are approximately 3,000 members in the D.C. National Guard. Not all of them have been called to duty as we speak. Now, the National Guard was last deployed in the city to help with inauguration activities, and they were planning to assist later this month during the World Bank IMF meetings. They tell me they are ready to go, the full contingent, as soon as they're called. Back to you.
Stacey Cohan in our newsroom. Thanks a lot.
We understand that President Bush is planning to address the nation tonight. The president is on his way back to Washington. He was spirited from Florida to Louisiana to Nebraska earlier today after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Earlier, the president said the resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we'll show the world that we will pass this test. And by teleconference, he joined a meeting of his National Security Council in Washington. And for a while there, with the White House and Camp David under threat of attack, the president's whereabouts were being kept secret.
And there are at least a couple of high-level government officials who are saying that they believe that Osama bin Laden and his organization is behind.
And Jack Kelly of USA Today, who was, of course, in Jerusalem when that pizza parlor was attacked by a suicide bomber, said he doesn't have any doubts about it being Osama bin Laden being up to this task, being capable of this task. That is not to say that he is the one responsible, but that's the name being bandied about, as it always is when something of this nature happens.
But again, we talked with Hussein Ibish, who was with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and he cautioned everyone not to jump to conclusions. He said, remember after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, everybody was quick to blame this on an Arab person, maybe an Arab American. It ended up being a domestic terrorism. So he was cautioning everyone to just wait and see.
Let's go. We have some videotape of people's response, people who were eyewitnesses or who were in the vicinity of the Pentagon attack earlier this morning. Let's go to that.
I recognized that the plane was coming in low, and I started watching it. And, of course, I was listening to the radio, and I just heard the president's address about the attack in New York. And I thought it looked funny, but I didn't put two and two together. And then it sheared off the top of that pole over there, slammed into another pole, went right into the building. There was a massive explosion and absolute chaos afterwards. And you could hear people screaming, "Oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God." It was unbelievable.
I'm thinking this is a travesty beyond belief. I know we need our money for this defense budget now. This is outrageous.
I'm worried about my mother. She was on that same wing, and I can't find her. I call my dad. I don't know where she is, and I can't get near anything. I can't get near my purse. Can't get near my car. Can't get near anything. So right now, I'm just trying to hold on.
We heard a loud bang. The ceiling, everything shook. The ceiling started to fall in, and we just grabbed our stuff and ran out. There's generators and things. We just thought something, there was malfunction, something exploded. That's nothing of this.
When we were in the conference room, we thought a truck had hit the building. So we knew it was a bomb because it was like 3 loud explosions, so we didn't know exactly what it was. We were just running and trying to get out of there. I mean, everything, ceiling tiles were falling in, and what was going through my mind is when I was out there was to make sure that we were all getting out of the building okay. That's all we were just, because we didn't know what to do. We panicked. We couldn't breathe because all the fumes, all the gasoline fumes was hurting us, and we got out.
The first speaker there was Mike Walter of USA Today. We've seen him on our air many times before. And David Beardsley, who writes for us and who lives over near Fort Myer, not far from there, said his whole house shook.
He actually felt it.
Yeah, and the cats scattered, he said.
I mean, it has been an incredible day. It really has. It's just, and I've used the word surreal before, but as we watch the events that unfolded, who would have imagined it? Who would have imagined it?
Well, this is, once again, this is New York City, the World Trade Center, a third building, actually, Building 7, a 47-story building just collapsed earlier today, but they were able to get people out of that building, of course, because they were worried about the structural integrity of the building, and they were right, it did collapse. So that's 3, the 2 towers, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, and Building 7, a 47-story building.
And Dave Statter just spoke with someone who's putting a figure of casualties in New York at 10,000.
Well, we don't know for sure, but we know that there were,
at least 10,000.
Well, we don't know for sure, but we know that, thousands of people were in the building when it was hit. And we know that there were about 24,000 employees in the Pentagon. We know that 36 people were treated at the hospital. In a sense, that's not good news, because you would have hoped for more injuries.
This all began just before 9 o'clock this morning when a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Shortly, about 18 minutes after that, a second plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And then suddenly reports that right here in our backyard in Washington, D.C., that a plane had hit very close to the Pentagon.
About 9:38 this morning, and Ted Olson, the Solicitor General of the United States, confirms that his wife Barbara was on board that aircraft that did hit the Pentagon. She called him from her cell phone to report that there were hijackers on board the plane.
And according to the Associated Press, she apparently told Mr. Olson about knife-wielding hijackers on board, and there's not much more coming out of there, but she apparently is one of the victims on board American Airlines.
Barbara Olson, the author of a book about Hillary Clinton, to identify her.
This has indeed been a day that a lot of us are going to remember for many years to come. Many have compared it to what happened at Pearl Harbor, where 2,400 people lost their lives. People will say, where were you the day?
CNN is reporting explosions in Afghanistan right now. Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska says America is forever changed by this. America is in for a long fight. Any notion of America being invincible, that's gone today.
We do want to look back at how this day began and what happened. I think all right, we're going to get to that in just a moment. But, Gordon, you were down there. You were actually at the Pentagon with Dave Statter earlier today. What was the scene like there for the people and for you?
Well, first of all, as I described it earlier, it was as if you took one of those metal wedges that you use to split wood. In other words, you put it on the log and you hit it with a sledgehammer to split the log. It's as if one of those wedges a huge one, went right into that fifth floor E-wing, you know, facing west of the Pentagon, and just split it open. And then the floors collapsed on the other, one on the other. They did at the they did at the Murrah building in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Of course, there were. Now we have pictures of here are CNN pictures of what's happening tonight in Afghanistan. This is from Kabul. Can we get an audio on this?
Apparently.
Well, okay.
There's
just reports of explosions in Afghanistan. Now, as you know, as I said earlier, the Taliban, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, was denying that Osama bin Laden had anything to do with what happened today.
Very quiet at this
we now have audio.
Moment. The city still trace of fire, rockets going up around the airport, trace of fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport.